The look on my stepfather Mark's face was a perfect mix of shock and contempt, a sour cocktail I'd been served my entire life. He stood in the doorway of the house I grew up in, blocking the entrance with his bulky frame as if I were a common thief and not the girl who had spent the last 2 years caring for his dying wife. His daughter, my stepsister Chloe, peered over his shoulder, a smug little smirk playing on her lips. She always loved watching me suffer. It was the day after my mother's funeral, and they had already packed my bags. "What do you want, Lily?" Mark grunted, his voice thick with fake sympathy that did nothing to hide his glee. "I thought we said our goodbyes. You need to move on." He gestured to the 2 pathetic cardboard boxes on the porch, filled with the scraps of my life they deemed worthless enough to give me. I didn't say a word. I just looked past him, at the hallway where my mum's photos used to hang, now conspicuously bare. I glanced at the man standing beside me, a sharp older gentleman in a perfectly tailored suit holding a leather briefcase. Mark's eyes followed my gaze, a flicker of confusion in them before he puffed out his chest, trying to reassert his dominance. He sneered, pointing a thick finger at the street. "Get off my property, now!" He said it with such finality, such arrogance. He didn't realize that every brick, every window, every blade of grass he claimed as his own was already legally mine. His order to leave was not a threat. It was an admission of trespassing. The man beside me, Mr. Harrison, my lawyer, cleared his throat. The sound was quiet, but it cut through the tension like a razor. Mark was about to lose everything, and his own greed had handed me the very weapon I needed to take it all. You might be wondering how a man could throw his stepdaughter out onto the street the day after her mother's funeral. To understand that, you have to understand the 20 years of quiet promises and loud betrayals that led us to this moment. To understand my stepfather, you first have to understand my mother. Before Mark, it was just Mum and me against the world. Our house, the very one he now stood in, was our sanctuary. My dad passed away when I was too young to remember him, so my mum was my sun, my moon, and all my stars. She worked as a nurse, long, grueling hours. But she always came home with enough energy for me. We'd bake cookies that always came out a little burnt, watch old movies under a mountain of blankets, and she would help me with my homework at the kitchen table, her patience endless. The house was filled with her laughter, the smell of her perfume, and an unconditional love that I thought was unbreakable. It was a simple life, but it was perfect. It was ours. Then Mark arrived like a sudden, unforecasted storm. He was a contractor my mum met when the hospital was doing some renovations. He was handsome, charming, and he showered my mother with the attention she hadn't realized she was missing. He told her she was beautiful, that she deserved the world, and that he wanted to be the man to give it to her. She fell for him, hard and fast. I wanted to be happy for her, I truly did, but a cold knot of dread tightened in my stomach every time he was around. He was polite to me, but it was a brittle, surface-level politeness. His smiles never reached his eyes. I was not a daughter to him. I was an obstacle, a permanent fixture from his new wife's old life that he had to tolerate. He moved in 6 months after they met. Slowly, subtly, things began to change. My mum started spending more time with him and his friends, and less time with me. Family movie nights became dinner parties I wasn't invited to. The photos of my dad on the mantelpiece were quietly moved to a shoebox in the attic. Mark never asked for these things to happen, but he created an environment where my mum felt she had to choose, and she always chose him. He was an expert at making me feel like a guest in my own home. On their wedding day, my mum was radiant. As Mark slipped the ring on her finger, he glanced at me in the front row, and for a split second his mask slipped. I saw a flash of triumph in his eyes. He hadn't just married my mother. He had conquered our world. The real shift happened a year after the wedding, when my stepsister Chloe was born. If I was an obstacle to Mark, Chloe was his masterpiece. The moment she came into the world, our home transformed from a place where I felt tolerated into a place where I was actively in the way. Chloe's kingdom was established, and I was demoted from resident to servant. Everything revolved around her. The house was filled with expensive toys I was never allowed to touch, photos of her perfect chubby face, and the sound of Mark's booming laughter as he doted on his princess. The double standard was staggering and absolute. If Chloe scribbled on the walls with a crayon, Mark would chuckle and say she was a budding artist. If I left a textbook on the coffee table, he would sigh dramatically and ask my mum why I was so messy. My straight A report cards earned a non-committal. That's nice, Lily. While a crude finger painting by Chloe was framed and hung in the living room, I was expected to be her built-in, unpaid babysitter. I changed her diapers, fed her, and cleaned her messes. My teenage years weren't spent with friends at the mall, they were spent rocking a crying baby while Mark and my mum went out to dinner. Any complaint, any hint of frustration from me was immediately labelled as jealousy. "You're just jealous of the attention she gets, Lily," Mark would say, his voice dripping with condescension. "You should be happy to have a sister." But she wasn't my sister, she was my warden. She learned quickly from her father that I was beneath her. By the time she could talk, she was ordering me around, and if I didn't comply, she would run screaming to Daddy, and I would be the one getting punished for upsetting her. The most painful part was watching my own mother fade into the background of her own life, a willing accomplice in my erasure. She was so desperate to maintain the illusion of a happy, blended family that she allowed Mark's narrative to become law. In her eyes, his peace was more important than my pain. Sometimes I would catch her looking at me with a flicker of guilt, a shadow of the fierce, protective mother she used to be, but it would vanish as quickly as it came, replaced by a weary resignation. She chose her husband, and in doing so, she let him turn her daughter into the family scapegoat, the one to blame for every problem, the silent, invisible girl who kept the gears of their perfect little family turning. I was 19 when the diagnosis came. Lung cancer. The word landed in the center of our lives and shattered the fragile peace my mother had fought so hard to maintain. For Mark and Chloe, her illness was, at best, an inconvenience. For me, it was a summons. I dropped my community college classes and quit my waitressing job without a second thought. My only purpose became her. I learned to manage her medication schedules, navigate the labyrinth of doctor's appointments, and master the art of cooking meals that she could actually keep down. I helped her to the bathroom, washed her hair when she was too weak to stand in the shower, and read to her for hours when the pain kept her awake. Mark's performance as the caring husband was short-lived. His visits to her room became less frequent. He complained about the medical bills, even though my mother's insurance covered almost everything. He started working late almost every night, the smell of stale bar smoke on his clothes when he finally stumbled home. He couldn't stand the sight of her weakness. It was a crack in the perfect life he believed he was owed. Chloe, now a spoiled teenager, was even worse. She treated my mother's illness as a personal affront. "God, the house smells like a hospital," she'd whine, "and you're always with her. My friends want to come over, but it's too depressing here." Her cruelty was so casual, so profound, it left me speechless. But as they pulled away, my mother and I found our way back to each other. In the quiet darkness of her room, stripped of Mark's influence, she started to see things clearly. She saw who was holding her hand through the worst of it, and who was annoyed they had to cancel a golf game for a chemo appointment. The guilt in her eyes was a constant, unspoken apology. One night, when the house was silent and she was surprisingly lucid, she gripped my hand with a strength I hadn't felt in months. "I'm so sorry, Lily," she whispered, tears rolling down her hollowed cheeks. "I let him dim your light. I was a coward, and I am so sorry." I told her it was okay, that I loved her, but she shook her head, a fierce urgency in her eyes. No, you listen to me, she insisted. I bought this house with the money your father left for us before I ever met Mark. I made a promise to your dad that you would always have a home, that you would always be safe here. She fumbled with the drawer of her bedside table and pulled out a small, old-fashioned key, pressing it into my palm. Everything you need is in here. He can't touch it. It's yours, Lily. It has always been yours. Don't you let him take it from you. She passed away 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning, just as the sun was starting to stream through her window. It was peaceful. I was holding her hand, just as I had been all night. The house was silent. Mark had left hours earlier for an important early meeting, and Chloe had stayed the night at a friend's house to get away from the gloom. In the end, it was just like it had been in the beginning, me and my mum. I closed her eyes, whispered one last "I love you," and felt the last bit of warmth leave her fingers. The grief was a physical weight, so heavy I could barely breathe. The funeral was a nauseating performance. Mark played the role of the devastated widower to perfection, his face a mask of tragic sorrow as he accepted hugs from relatives. He delivered a eulogy full of beautiful lies about his beloved wife and soulmate. Chloe stood beside him, looking appropriately sad but fidgeting with her phone whenever she thought no one was watching. I sat in the front row, numb. Their tears were for the audience. My tears were real, and I refused to shed them for their show. I felt completely alone in a room full of people. The charade ended the very next morning. I hadn't slept, my eyes raw from crying into my pillow all night. Mark called me into the living room. All the feigned grief was gone, replaced by a cold, transactional hardness. "Lily," he said, not even bothering to sit down, "I know this is hard, but it's time to be practical. Your mother is gone, and you need to start your own life now. I need you to gather your things and be out of the house by this evening." The words didn't register at first. Out of the house? My mother's scent was still on her sheets upstairs. Her favourite mug was still sitting by the sink. "What?" I managed to whisper. "This is my house now," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "It's for me and my family, my real family. You're an adult now. You can take care of yourself." From the doorway, Chloe piped up, her voice dripping with venomous glee. "Don't be such a baby, Lily. You can't expect to live here for free forever. Besides, I want your room. It has a better view." They looked at me, a united front. Two vultures who had been waiting patiently for the kill. Mark gestured to two sad-looking boxes by the door. "I packed the important stuff. We'll be clearing out the rest of your junk this weekend." He was throwing me out, not just from the house, but from the family, from my entire life. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I felt the small, hard key in my pocket. I looked at their triumphant faces, and a cold, clear resolve cut through the fog of my grief. I picked up my boxes, walked out the front door, and didn't look back. The first week was a blur of shame and dislocation. I spent 2 nights on the sofa of a friend from my old job, but I could see the strain it put on her and her roommate. I couldn't be a burden. So my world shrank to the 4 doors of my beat-up Honda Civic. The driver's seat became my bed, the passenger seat my closet, and the trunk held the 2 boxes of my former life. I'd park in brightly lit supermarket parking lots, reclining the seat as far as it would go, trying to sleep with one eye open. I ate cheap sandwiches from gas stations and used their restrooms to brush my teeth, avoiding my own reflection in the grimy mirrors. Grief is a heavy fog, but grief combined with homelessness is a crushing physical weight. Each morning, I'd wake up stiff and cold, and 2 facts would hit me in quick succession. My mother was gone, and I had nowhere to go. Mark and Chloe's triumphant faces were burned into my memory. They had succeeded. They had rendered me completely invisible, a piece of trash they had taken to the curb. I felt worthless, abandoned, and utterly broken. My lowest point came one rainy night, parked in the back of a deserted strip mall. As I ate a stale protein bar for dinner, the sobs I had been holding back finally broke free. I cried for my mum, for the home I had lost, and for the pathetic, lonely girl I had become. It was in that moment of absolute despair, my face wet with tears, that my fingers brushed against the key in my jeans pocket. The feeling of the cold, hard metal was a jolt back to reality. I pulled it out, holding it in my trembling hand. It wasn't just a key, it was my mother's last stand. It was her final act of love. I squinted at it in the dim interior light of the car. It was a safe deposit box key. Stamped on the small metal tag was the name of a national bank, one with a branch right in the centre of town. A strange calm washed over me, pushing back the edges of my panic. The grief was still a gaping wound, but now a new feeling began to stitch it closed. Purpose. This was a breadcrumb my mother had left me, a clue. While Mark and Chloe were probably redecorating my bedroom and celebrating their victory, they had no idea my mother had already made her move years ago. A tiny spark of hope ignited in my chest. My mother had left me a map. It was time to see where it led. The next morning, I felt like a soldier on a mission. I drove to the library and used a public computer to research what I needed. To access a deceased person's safe deposit box, I needed the key, my ID, and a certified copy of her death certificate. Getting that certificate was the first, most painful step. I had to go to the county clerk's office and state my mother's full name and date of death to a bored-looking official. Saying the words out loud felt like a fresh wound, but I didn't let my voice crack. This wasn't just paperwork. It was ammunition. With the official document in hand, I drove downtown to the bank, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and hope. I must have been a sight, walking into that pristine, quiet bank lobby. I hadn't had a proper shower in days, my hair was a mess, and my clothes were wrinkled from being slept in. But I walked straight to the service desk, held my head high, and explained my situation. A kind, professional bank officer led me past the tellers and toward the vault. The giant, circular steel door swung open with a heavy silence, and she led me into a sterile, climate-controlled room lined with thousands of identical metal doors. She used her key and mine to retrieve a long, surprisingly heavy box and showed me to a small private viewing room. She closed the door gently, leaving me alone. My hands shook as I placed the box on the table and lifted the lid. There wasn't much inside, but what was there changed everything. On top was a thick manila envelope with my name, "For Lily," written in my mother's beautiful, familiar handwriting. My breath hitched. I opened the flap and pulled out a sheaf of papers. The first one was the original deed to the house. I scanned it, my eyes widening in disbelief. The owner wasn't listed as my mother or Mark. The legal owner was the Lily Carter Protective Trust. Beneath the deed were the trust documents. I read them, my heart hammering against my ribs. My mother, my brilliant, forward-thinking mother, had set up an irrevocable trust 20 years ago, shortly after my father died. She had used his life insurance money to buy the house outright and placed it inside this legal fortress, with me as the sole beneficiary. The terms were crystal clear. The trust owned the house, and upon her death, full and indivisible ownership transferred directly to me. It was mine. It had always been mine. Mark wasn't the owner. He was a guest. Finally, I unfolded the handwritten letter. "My dearest Lily," it began, "if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and I fear that the man I married has shown his true colours. I am so sorry. I set this up long before I met him, to honour my promise to your father that you would always have a safe foundation in this world. I wanted to believe in love and second chances, but a mother's instinct is a powerful thing. I was always afraid he saw you as an inconvenience. This house, Lily, is your birthright. It was built from your father's love and my hope for your future. No one can take it from you. Now be brave. Fight for it. I love you endlessly. Mum." The tears I shed then were not of grief, but of gratitude. My mother hadn't just left me a house, she had left me a sword and a shield. I walked out of that bank a different person than the one who had walked in. The desperate, grieving girl who had slept in her car was gone. In her place was a woman with a mission. The grief for my mother hadn't vanished, but it had crystallized into something hard and sharp. Resolve. Mark and Chloe thought they had won. They thought they had broken me. They were about to find out how wrong they were. I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed a professional, a fighter. I took the last of the emergency cash I had saved from my waitressing job and booked a consultation with a lawyer named Arthur Harrison. His online profile specialized in property litigation and estate disputes. He looked like a shark, which was exactly what I needed. I sat in his expensive leather chair across a vast mahogany desk and calmly laid out my story. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I presented the facts and the documents, the trust, the deed, the death certificate, as if I were reporting on a case study. Mr. Harrison listened intently, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he picked up the trust documents, his eyes scanning the pages with practiced speed. A slow, thin smile spread across his face. "Your mother," he said, his voice filled with genuine admiration, "was an exceptionally intelligent woman." He leaned back in his chair and looked at me over the top of his reading glasses. "Let me be unequivocally clear, Miss Carter. These documents are ironclad. This is a fortress, legally speaking. The moment your mother passed away, you became the sole, legal and rightful owner of that property. Your stepfather has zero claim to it. What he did was not just immoral, it was illegal. He wrongfully evicted the legal owner. He is currently trespassing in your home." Hearing a man of law confirm it, hearing him use words like illegal and trespassing, was like having a steel rod fused to my spine. It was the validation I desperately needed. "So we sent him an eviction notice?" I asked, my voice steady. Mr. Harrison leaned forward, a predatory glint in his eye. "Oh, we will do much more than that. First, we will go to the property together. We will serve him notice to vacate immediately. Given the illegal eviction, we can be aggressive. We'll give him 24 hours. Second, after he is out, we will file a civil lawsuit. We will sue him for the fair market rental value of the home for every single day he has occupied it since your mother's death. We will also include damages for the cost of your displacement and emotional distress." He paused, letting the words sink in. "We won't just get your house back, Miss Carter. We will get you justice." A cold, clean wave of relief washed over me. It was perfect. "Do it," I said without a moment's hesitation. "Do it all." 2 days later, I stood on that familiar porch again. I wore a simple black blazer I'd bought from a thrift store, the first new piece of clothing I'd owned in years. I felt 1,000 feet tall. Mr. Harrison stood beside me, his leather briefcase in hand. This wasn't a plea for entry, it was a reclamation. When the door swung open, Mark's face twisted into the same sneer I'd seen the day he threw me out. Chloe was right behind him, looking bored and annoyed by the interruption. "I thought I told you to get lost," Mark growled. Before I could speak, Mr. Harrison stepped forward. His voice was calm, but it had the sharp, cutting edge of authority. "Good afternoon, Mr. Stevens. My name is Arthur Harrison. I am legal counsel for Miss Lily Carter, the sole and rightful owner of this property." Mark let out a short, ugly laugh. "Owner? You've got to be kidding me. She owns nothing. This is my house. Now get off my porch before I call the cops." He moved to slam the door, but Mr. Harrison was quicker. He held up a hand and presented a thick, crisp envelope. "I wouldn't do that," Mr. Harrison advised coolly, "and I wouldn't call the police, as they will only confirm what this document makes plain. This is a legal notice to quit, served to you as an unauthorized occupant of Miss Carter's home." Mark snatched the envelope, ripping it open with theatrical anger. His eyes flew across the first page. I watched as the color drained from his face. The blustering rage was replaced by a sickly, pale confusion. "What is this? Protective trust? This is fake, it's garbage," he sputtered, looking wildly between me and my lawyer. I spoke for the first time, my voice quiet but firm, carrying in the sudden silence. "It's real, and that's my house." Chloe, sensing her father's panic, rushed forward. "Daddy, what is he talking about? Make them leave." But Mark could only stare at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. The realization was dawning, and with it came a tidal wave of pure rage. "You!" he finally screamed, his voice cracking. "You scheming little witch! Your mother would be ashamed of you." "On the contrary," Mr. Harrison interjected, his voice like ice. "Your late wife's foresight is what brings us here today. As the notice clearly states, you have 24 hours to remove yourself and all your belongings from this property. If you are still here at 3 p.m. tomorrow, the Sheriff's Department will assist in your removal. Furthermore, a civil suit for wrongful eviction, emotional distress, and retroactive rent will be filed in the morning. Good day." The door to their kingdom had just been slammed shut, and they were on the wrong side of it. For a long moment, there was only the sound of the wind rustling the leaves on the oak tree in the front yard. Mark stood frozen, the legal notice dangling from his hand like a flag of surrender. The rage in his eyes flickered out, replaced by something far more pathetic, raw panic. Chloe had started to cry, not quiet tears of sadness, but loud, ugly sobs of pure, selfish terror. The world as they knew it was collapsing in real time. "Lily, wait," Mark said, his voice suddenly weak and pleading. He took a step toward me, his hand outstretched. "Honey, let's not be so hasty. We can talk about this. Think about what your mother would want. She wouldn't want to see her family out on the street." The word family sounded like poison coming from his lips. He was trying to appeal to a part of me that he himself had killed. "My mother would want me to be safe," I replied, my voice devoid of all emotion. "She wouldn't want me sleeping in my car while you played king of the castle in her house." Chloe's wails grew louder. "It's not fair. Where are we supposed to go? My school, my friends, everything is here. You're ruining my life," she shrieked, as if she were the victim in all of this. Her complete lack of self-awareness was almost impressive. I looked at them, at the two people who had made my life a living hell, now reduced to a desperate, panicked mess. I felt no satisfaction, no pity, not even anger anymore. I just felt done. The power they had wielded over me for my entire life had evaporated into thin air. "You didn't seem too concerned about where I would go when you left my things on the porch," I said, my voice as cold and final as a closing door. "You have until 3 p.m. tomorrow. I suggest you stop crying and start packing." I turned my back on them and walked down the pathway without a second glance. Mr. Harrison fell into step beside me, and we didn't say a word until we reached his car. My phone began to buzz incessantly in my pocket almost immediately. A barrage of texts from Mark, first threatening, then begging. Messages from Chloe, full of blame and childish insults. I powered the phone off. Their noise couldn't touch me anymore. For the first time since my mother died, a profound, quiet peace settled over me. I had honored her. I had been brave. The war was over. I returned the next day at 3 p.m. on the dot. As Mr. Harrison had arranged, a sheriff's deputy met me there. His calm, uniformed presence was an undeniable symbol that the games were over. They weren't gone. Of course. A beat-up moving truck was parked haphazardly at the curb, its ramp lowered onto the lawn. The front yard was a chaotic mess of half-packed boxes, overturned furniture, and garbage bags. They had clearly thought I was bluffing, that I would break and give them more time. Now they were in a frantic, losing race against the clock. Mark's face was slick with sweat and contorted with impotent rage. Chloe was sitting on the steps, her makeup-streaked face a mask of sullen misery. They looked exactly like what they were, dethroned tyrants, shocked that their power had vanished. The deputy approached them without haste. "Folks," he said, his voice polite but firm, "the time you were allotted has expired. You need to be off this property immediately." Mark started to bluster. "We just need a little more time, officer." "There's been a misunderstanding." The deputy simply shook his head. "There's no misunderstanding, sir. This is a lawful eviction. Your time is up. Please vacate the premises." There was no arguing with the simple, solid authority of the law. Watching them scramble to throw the last of their possessions into that truck was the true moment of their defeat. It ended not with a dramatic explosion, but with the pathetic scraping sound of cardboard on pavement. The final nail in their coffin came a few weeks later. Mr. Harrison called me. "The lawsuit is proceeding," he said, a note of satisfaction in his voice. "And we uncovered some interesting financial documents during discovery. It seems Mr. Stevens was in significant debt. He'd taken out several high-interest loans and maxed out multiple credit cards, apparently believing the house was his asset to leverage. Without it, his creditors are closing in. He's facing total financial ruin." He added that the college fund my mother had painstakingly set up for Chloe was almost empty, drained to pay for clothes, parties, and a brand new car. Their own greed had authored their downfall far more effectively than I ever could have. That night, I walked through the empty, silent rooms of my house. The toxic energy of their presence still lingered, but it was fading. I went upstairs and stood in my mother's bedroom, which Chloe had left in a state of disarray. I didn't feel anger. I felt a quiet sense of closure. I had taken back this sacred space. I ran my hand along the wall and whispered into the stillness, "I'm home, Mom." And in the peaceful silence that answered, I finally was.